John, part 2.
So, what have you been up to? What do you want to talk about? The floor is yours.
So I remember distinctly in our conversation last time, you said there were things that we can know 100% certain, or you said you were 100% certain about things. And I asked why, and we never really drilled down deep as to what knowledge means, what understanding means, how do we come to that knowledge. We never really got deep into that type of epistemology, and it might be good to go there. So I guess my question to you, could you please restate what you mean by you know something?
There's the coherence theory, and then there's the correspondence theory of knowledge. So the correspondence theory has to do with the reality that we contact through our senses, and the coherence theory has to do with how the truths hang together without any contradiction whatsoever. There could be paradox, but there cannot be any contradiction whatsoever. That's knowledge.
Okay. So you're saying you have to have two things to have knowledge.
Yeah.
So now I distinctly remember you telling me in our last conversation that you have absolute knowledge that the supernatural exists. And so my question is, how do you have knowledge of the supernatural when one of the qualifiers for knowledge is reality? Isn't the supernatural by definition outside of our reality?
No, it's outside of the natural realm, but we are not only natural, we are also supernatural. Like, for example, we have free will, which is by definition supernatural. You and I, because we're free, we know that we have a component, which we call the mind or the soul, which is not natural. So our reality is comprised of the natural and the supernatural.
Okay, well then what is supernatural?
Not natural.
So how can our natural mind be not natural?
Our mind is not natural. You're saying it's a natural mind, but it's not natural. It's supernatural.
How did you determine our mind is not natural?
Because we're free.
Because we're free. Okay, so it is a free will argument. Then how come we have Christians, Calvinists, that don't ascribe to the free will argument that you're using?
They're heretics. They've strayed from the truth.
Okay. So why do you believe that we have free will?
Because we're responsible. We're morally responsible for the choices that we make. And if you're not free, then you're not responsible, right?
No. The responsibility comes from the way we interact with others. I'm not sure that it has anything to do with being free.
Well, when the vending machine is broken, do you send it to prison or do you just get a mechanic to fix it?
So you still have to be responsible for your actions.
Well, if everything's just a great big machine, a well-oiled machine...
I don't think it is. I don't think it's a well-oiled machine. That's not what I was implying.
Where's the freedom then?
The freedom is in us not realizing that we don't have a freedom.
So the freedom is in ignorance?
Yes.
Okay, so does the vending machine know that it's not free?
The vending machine is not like us. The vending machine, as far as, in this example, doesn't have a consciousness. Now, so there are problems in AI, consciousness paradoxes that we could talk about where the vending machine might be aware of its incapabilities. That might be analogous, but I don't think that analogy works the way that you think it does.
Well, if you were to build a really sophisticated robot that was indistinguishable from a real human being, would you attribute all the things that you attribute to a human being to that robot or not?
Yeah, so if the vending machine cares about the well-being of other things, of course, I'm going to care about its well-being.
If you were to discover somehow that your wife is a sophisticated robot, would that or would that not take away from the relationship? In other words, would you not be disappointed to find out that she's just a very sophisticated robot?
I don't know. I don't think I would. My immediate inclination is to say no, because I know what it's like to be around her and I know that she cares about me. So in some ways it would be completely indistinguishable from a human being.
Okay.
And I wouldn't care.
It wouldn't change anything if you figured out that there's an on-off switch in the back of her head and there's a mute button. Would you really resist the urge to mute her, knowing that she's just a robot?
Because I've lived my entire life. I lived my life with her, not knowing about that. So knowing about that one thing, how could that take away from all the rich experiences that I've had with her? I don't think that makes any sense. I still have background knowledge of our past.
Let's say you had to take a trip And instead of buying 2 tickets, you could just buy 1 ticket for yourself and switch her off and shove her in a bag and take her on as carry-on luggage or in a suitcase, You could save an airfare that way, and you could justify it by saying, well, she's just a robot, so I don't need to treat her like a human. I can fold her up in my suitcase and take her, and it can save half the airfare. Would you have any qualms about doing that?
I think if she was sophisticated enough, I would ask her if she cared about that. If it was something she cared about, then I wouldn't do it. I think compassionate, caring people would act the same way. We are, in fact, experienced machines. Everything that we do, everything that we've ever interacted with is just a product. Ourselves now are just a product of those prior interactions. Sure, there are some instinctual things we do, but even those instincts are predicated on the machinery. We wouldn't act a certain way if we didn't have the appropriate machinery. So in some sense, everything that we've done up until now is just assumptions about our previous experiences.
If we think of ourselves as machines, we can get these signals like, hey, don't do this. This is the wrong thing to do. And it's like this Darwinian mechanism that's evolved over thousands of years, according to the naturalists. And you could just say, well, listen, I'm just going to ignore that. Why? Because I have my reasons why I want to ignore these signals. I'm going to do it my way. And I've got my reasons, and it's a choice that I make. So what's your counter argument against that rebellious attitude? Or do you think that it is justifiable? Or do you think that it's only dependent on a case-by-case basis? Or how would you deal with that?
Well, on our last talk, I said that I believe that everything that we choose to do, everything that all of our beliefs, all of our assertions are purely emotional. So with that, I didn't always have this realization. I just went through the world and did what I thought was best, but I never understood what was really happening inside the machine. You know what I mean? So in the past few years, I've come to realize that it's through our empathy and compassion with our fellow species, and even things that are not of our species, even our world, like the way we interact with the world. Through our compassion, we can be better to the world. We can show less harm. We can take actions that might harm us a little bit, but cause less harm overall. So that's how I go through the world. I say, for the most part, now some things you just react, but for the most part, I like to think about how I behave, and is my behavior going to impact some other creature or leave the world in a way that might negatively impact or cause harm to future people. I don't need a God to tell me to do that. I just do it. No God required.
And this brings me to another question. If you became convinced that God did exist, what would you be most reluctant to give up in terms of pleasure, in terms of habits, in terms of sins, to put it bluntly? Are there things that you would regret having to give up? Like St. Augustine famously said in his Confessions, "Give me chastity, God, just not yet. I want to dabble a little bit more in my lust." Are you the same way, or do you feel that you would rise to the occasion and gladly walk away from all your sins instantly?
I wouldn't give up anything.
That's a very honest answer.
I don't bow to the whims of dictators, people or gods. So I have to say that. I have to say I'm compelled by my experiences. And anything that would ask me to be not compelled or not to act by my experiences would be defiance of me as a person.
No.
Yeah. So I would say no.
No. Your dog can give you a puppy dog look and you'll bow to his will. And your wife can give you one look and you'll bow to her will. I'm sure that if God gave you a look, you'd bow to his will too. Don't be silly.
No, I wouldn't. Because if it's the God that you're talking about, the God of all love, he wouldn't ask me to do something that I don't enjoy doing.
Does your wife ever ask you to do anything that you don't enjoy doing? Just be honest with me.
Of course.
There you go. You're willing to do it. You're willing to make self-sacrifice.
But I can interact with my wife and I can see that she's willing to do things that she doesn't like to do for me. God is not that way.
Sure he is. He suffered and died on the cross for you.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. You mean he was inconvenienced for a short period of time? And I'm not even convinced that a God can be inconvenienced. So in some ways, it wasn't even a sacrifice. It was a weird blood ritual that's based on the Yom Kippur. It's just, it's crazy.
No, I'm just curious how you would respond to God Almighty reaching down to you and giving you an opportunity for conversion. Would you say yes? Would you say no? Would you say maybe later? What would you say to God?
Convert to what? I don't understand what you mean by conversion.
Conversion means turning away from self-love towards love of God, because this is the first commandment. You shall love God with all your heart, with all your strength, and with all your mind, right? And you're not doing that. So if he were to reach into the secret recesses of your heart one night while you're laying in bed and he would confront you, what would you say?
It's immoral by definition. I don't bow to dictators, and that's a dictatorial thing to do. So, no, I wouldn't.
Okay, so you just would say no to God.
If it's that God, yeah.
An all-good God who loves you and who created
That's
you
not an
out of
all-good
nothing.
God. An all-good God that says you have to love me no matter what is not a good God.
No.
Sorry.
You're not forced to love him. It's a choice you have to make. That's the fundamental choice we have to make is, are you going to return God's love, yes or no?
That's not a choice. So if I believe a God exists and I believe that he wants me to love him, right?
For your own good. Yeah, for your own good.
That's weird. I don't understand
Not
that.
for his good. He doesn't need anything.
What good would come from me loving something that tells me to love it for my own good?
Because he's the source of everything that's good. Life, justice, health, beauty, everything that you want. He is the source of it. So you have to go to him if you want the good things, because all of the perfections reside in God.
No.
Where do you think that the perfections reside? Where is beauty? Where is justice? Where is health? Where is life?
What do you mean by perfection? Health is relative to our natural state. Our life is a process.
Is everything relative?
Yeah. We can't know what it's like to not be relative. That's a weird thing to think about. If you claim to know something, you have to be able to show it.
The problem is not a lack of evidence. The problem is the superabundance. Everything in the natural world points to God.
I can say everything in the natural world points to Marduk. I could say everything in the world points to a deistic God that brought the world into existence and then vaped out. I can say all these things and I have zero proof for them. So why should I prescribe to your specific deity?
Well, because there are two categories, the finite and the infinite. Are you finite or are you infinite? And once you acknowledge that you're finite, that acknowledgement of the finite necessarily implies the infinite.
It depends on what you mean by me.
Well, anything. I mean, you, your clan, your planet, your universe, whatever. It's all finite.
My consciousness is finite because it's tied to my body. The cells in my body might not be finite. The particles that they're made of, the quarks, those might not be finite. We don't know that. We can't see that far. But those parts, see, I'm just a sum of my parts. Those parts don't mean that they're me. Like I am just those parts put together, arranged that way. That's what makes me. I can't say what my parts are separate from the way that I am.
Yeah, but that brings me to another philosophical conundrum where if you're nothing but this particular configuration of matter, energy, and space-time, then all we need to do to reverse your physical death is put back together that particular configuration of matter, energy, and space-time. And it is possible, theoretically, one day to have the technology necessary to do that. You have to admit, if there's only the natural.
This is the transporter paradox. So it's a paradox for a reason. I don't even want to go there. I know something about it, and I can talk about it for days and days.
Well, the problem is that it totally rebuts naturalism because there is no...
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Configurations of matter is just information. So as long as you can store sufficient enough information to recreate the thing that was originally created, then there you go.
Well, you should be excited. If you're a naturalist, you should be very excited about this. And I should tell you that there are atheists that are working on immortality, and there are different avenues that people are pursuing in order to achieve immortality. I think they're all futile. They're all a complete naive waste of time. But if you're a naturalist, you should be very excited about those naive and ridiculous fantasies. No?
I think it's kind of I don't know, slanderous to call people naturalist in like a pejorative kind of way, because we can't measure anything that's not natural, and it's weird to say that we can.
The very fact that your opinion differs from mine proves that the supernatural exists.
No, it doesn't, and that's crazy. How? Show me.
Because you're weighing your point of view against my point of view, and you're saying this point of view is better than that point of view. This implies freedom, the freedom to weigh options.
I have evidence that the natural world exists.
Yeah, and you're weighing that evidence.
You have zero evidence that the spiritual world exists.
So what you're doing in your mind is you've got a scale, and you put your very heavy naturalistic evidence on one side of the scale, and it tips the scale, and I've got nothing on my side according to you. So you've won this battle. You've weighed in the scale.
I don't think it's a battle. So that's the weird thing. We could both have evidences. I think sufficiently strong claims require sufficiently strong evidence. If you don't have that evidence, come on.
Yeah, well, everything. I just told you that everything is evidence of God's existence. Everything, because the finite implies the infinite.
I can say everything is because I made it. And you would have zero way to refute me using your logic.
No, I can refute you by your very own philosophy. By your own philosophy, you were not saying that out of a free intellectual weighing of options in your mind. You were not coming to a conclusion based on reason, because you from your own perspective do not believe that you are able to freely weigh options, intellectual options, and come to any sort of rational decision. You're just, by your own admission, a big machine.
My mental state has no bearing on the analogy.
Of course it does. Your thought processes are, according to you, purely naturalistic.
We call this in philosophy, we call it a red herring. You're refusing to address my analogy by saying that I'm the problem.
No, but everything that you say, every argument that you launch is either rational or not. And to be rational, it has to be free, right? Do you agree with that much?
Not necessarily, no.
No? Okay. So two calculating machines are coming out with different sums, right? They're both following the laws of nature. Neither one's violating any of the laws of nature. But you, for some reason, you want to say, oh, my sum is better than your sum.
No.
But you have to say that. You have to say that. That's my point. You have to say that. Why? Because everything in your worldview is absolutely determined. There is no way for you to have said anything other than that you think that your sum is better than my sum. But the reality is, if you were to step back and look at your worldview, you would admit that the only thing you can say is, it is what it is. It is what it is. My calculator came up with this sum. Your calculator came up with that sum. That's it. It is what it is. One is not better than the other. And when you say that your world is better...
But I can show you why my calculator came up with the sum. You can't.
No, I can. I can show you. I can show you that
By saying, look at the trees. This is a stupid argument, man.
No, I'm not saying looking at the trees. I'm saying that 1 + 1 = 2. And when we do mathematics or science and things start to get more complex and complicated, it's not as self-evident as 1 + 1 = 2. And we need to weigh intellectual options in our mind. And there's more than one way to skin a cat. In other words, when I was in university studying physics, you would get bonus points for having an elegant solution to a complicated problem in math and physics.
What do you mean by elegant?
More precise, more efficient, less clutter, less redundancy. Just like when you play chess, there's a more elegant way to play chess and have a very beautiful, swift defeat of your opponent rather than meandering and repeating yourself and all this sort of thing. So we do recognize that in reason, there is a freedom to go this way or to go that way. We have options and we freely choose them.
Reason is futile without evidence. You need to be able to show me that the supernatural exists. If you can show me the supernatural exists, I believe you.
It's not a question of the intellect. It's a question of the will. The will is attracted to the good.
You can't choose your will, dude. So what you're saying is you have the power to control your desires, and I don't think you do. I think you have the power to shape your desires, yes, but you do not have the power to control your desires. You can't say, I desire this, and will yourself to desire something. You can control and mediate once those desires arrive, but you can't control those impulses.
You wouldn't be very good as a weight loss coach, I can tell you that much.
Sure I can. and here's why. It's very important to understand this nuance. You can shape your desires. You can say, this desire leads me down this path.
There you go.
That's not necessarily choice. That's competing wills. Just because you can see different outcomes doesn't mean you actually decided to go one way or the other. It feels that way. I would definitely agree with you that it feels like we are making choices.
One way to test my hypothesis is to think about the afterlife. If there is no afterlife, then there's absolutely no meaning to any of the choices that we think are moral. There is absolutely no meaning to it.
There is meaning.
There's no lasting meaning.
No, it means that I think not lasting is what makes beauty. Otherwise, why you wouldn't cherish it? If something wasn't fleeting, you wouldn't give it value.
So you would voluntarily shorten the lives of your children in order to increase the value of your children's lives?
No, that's a mischaracterization of my argument.
Okay, explain.
So my argument is my children are special to me, A, because they're my genes and I'm programmed for them to be special to me.
How romantic.
Yeah. And B, my children are special because I know they're going to take care of me in my old age, or I would assume they would. That's our evolutionary need to have children. I think maybe part of of the problem with Christianity is its inability to accept death and loss.
We do accept death and loss. We do accept it.
No, you don't.
Yeah,
you're
we
gonna
do.
live forever, dude.
We
You're going to be with God, and those other horrible people, they might live forever, but they're going to be burned forever.
we put a lot of emphasis on suffering and death in the Catholic religion. I don't know about your evangelical forms of Christianity. I'm not sure about that, but
Right, self-flagellation and all that nonsense because you want to suffer the way Christ suffered. That's just weird. I don't
well,
even know.
there are abuses, but I'm not doing a lot of voluntary penances. My main goal is to accept the involuntary sufferings that come my way, the daily annoyances of life. Those are the penances we need to embrace rather than buying some sophisticated whips and leather chains.
That could be fun, though.
Yeah, there are a lot of fetishes that come, a lot of sexual fetishes come straight out of the Middle Ages and the Catholic culture, right? With chastity belts and these sorts of
No,
things.
people were self-harming for sex long before the Middle Ages.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
You should look into it. It's pretty interesting.
I'd rather not. I'd rather not be tempted by lusty things. It's a bit.
I don't think lust should be ignored. I think that causes a lot of harm. That's why you have kitty diddling priests.
Yeah, you need to.
You laugh at it, but I'm dead serious. That's probably why you have priests that molest children, because they've been denying themselves sexual gratification.
That's the problem with the calling of priesthood, is that some
There's
people.
no calling. That's where they think that God called them to do something, and so they refrain from doing something that's completely natural. And in the end, they end up hurting themselves and hurting other people and causing a bunch of harm. And it's your church doctrine that does that crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's a discipline that could change, but the point is that there is a calling. From my perspective, you have to understand that every priest is called to the priesthood. The critical distinction is between those who are called by God and those who are called by Satan. And when Satan calls someone into the priesthood, it's for all the wrong reasons: for power, for glory, for reputation, for money, to get close to young boys and to diddle them or whatever it is. So everyone is called. You know, I think you need to really discern the calling, whatever your calling is, even if it's marriage. Every calling is dangerous. Every calling.
I think it's a mistake to call something a calling. I think we have wants, and we sometimes anthropomorphize those wants.
So how big of a deal is sex for the atheist? Like, is that a motivating factor to say no to God?
That's an individual perspective. I don't know.
What's your perspective?
My perspective, as long as you're not harming someone or yourself, go for it.
Do what you want.
Do what thou wilt. Isn't that what the first commandment from the Satanic Temple is?
Yeah, that was borrowed from St. Augustine, by the way.
It was. I know the origins of it. I just think it's actually a beautiful sentiment. I think you should do what you want as long as you don't hurt anyone.
What about father and son that wanted to get married and have sex with each other because they love each other? You think that's okay?
Now you're going to get into naturalistic fallacies.
Why?
Because you're trying to paint morality as if it's something inborn, and there's reasons why humans refrain from engaging in sexual behavior with members of the same close genetic makeup.
Okay, so what is the danger between father and son having sex with each other?
There is zero danger.
Okay, so what is the problem morally with it? Or is there no problem morally? It's just an outdated taboo.
So another really unsatisfying answer is I think it depends. It depends on social stigma. It depends on perceived social evils. It depends on a lot of things. But
Are they hurting each other, father and son, by having sex with each other?
no, they're not.
So you don't think there's anything wrong with it objectively, just there's a societal pressure not to do it because of a taboo?
I don't think there's objective morality that way. I think there is objective morality, but it's born in consequence. So it depends upon how you weigh the consequence of their interaction.
Okay, so if someone came to you and said, I want to marry my son, what's your advice to me? You'd say,
I would say society is going to look on you a certain way, and as long as you're willing to accept that burden from society, do what thou wilt.
okay.
And as long as the child, the son is not underage, I think there's a consent issue.
What if he's like 35? Is that okay?
Do it.
But he's got mental illness. Is that okay?
No. It depends upon someone's ability to give consent.
How do you measure that?
It's very difficult.
Yeah. Because if someone's not obviously mentally ill, How do you diagnose that? It's like a lot of people today think that they have the opposite sex, like they're actually a man, but they think they're a woman.
That's really, really touchy subject. I think there's a better way to talk about it, and I'm going to derail it to keep from going down a crazy rabbit hole. So there was a guy who started having urges to harm and have sex with children. And he killed them and was like freaked out about it. And he wrote letters saying, I didn't want to do this, whatever. Scan my brain, scan me. Why am I acting this way? Why am I acting out? And they scanned him and found he had a golf ball sized tumor in his head. They took the tumor out. The urges went away. Now, however, several months later, the tumor grew back and the urges came back. Was it his will to want to harm those children, or was that purely biological? Like, did he consent himself to actually hurt those children?
All these aberrations and illnesses are consequences of sin, original and actual, that's for sure.
That's a stupid thing to say.
It's not stupid. We were made perfect in a perfect Garden of Eden with no death, no illness. Our abuse of free will led to all kinds of things, hurricanes and, violence.
Who made the cancer?
Sin.
Who made the sin?
Humans and angels that fell from grace.
Who made those?
God made everything good, including free will.
Okay. Did God know that those beings were going to do the things that he called sin?
Yeah, we talked about this last time, but we can do it again if you want.
I don't think God has a will either, because if God knows everything, all of his actions are determined, because he's going to choose, if he has a choice, he's going to go the direction he wants things to go. So in some ways, God doesn't have a will. He's not indeterminate. God has to be determinate.
So if you were to be God for a day, what can you just describe for me, like what sorts of actions you would take?
Yeah. I have this weird dystopian dream that everyone in America or in the world will be able to study critical thinking and understand what it means to critically analyze questions and problems and be able to discuss it with one another. I think everyone can benefit from reading about social justice theory, like John Rawls and other thinkers that. I think that's really beautiful, the way that he writes about it. And even if you read his dissenters, they even have really good and beautiful ideas. If I were God for a day, I would command and force everyone to read Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now, so they understand the world is actually getting better and it's us that's doing it.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask.